We are joined on this episode by a Colorado filmmaker who has written, directed, and produced an impressive number of projects in the Centennial State. She is the owner of Blackwing Digital Entertainment and operates Blackwing Air, Sea, and Land, which provides specialty camera rigs and vehicles. In addition to her narrative projects, she has worked with major brands like Nat Geo, Discovery Channel, CNN, Audi, and Chevy. She is Meryem Ersoz. Meryem, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me here. I hope it's going to be a fun night.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it will.
I got lots of stories.
We're looking forward to them. What we usually do, we'll start out with, we like to ask, in your childhood, in your early days, what maybe first got you interested in storytelling and movie making? Was it a person, family member, experience, or maybe a particular piece of pop culture like a movie or TV show that really gave you the bug for this?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Actually, I have a somewhat strange pathway to film production. I would say a little unusual in that I didn't go to film school, but I do have a PhD that I obtained at the University of Oregon, and I started teaching film history there, film history and American literature classes. So I actually have this kind of dual degree in American literature and film history. My dissertation was on early film history. I used to teach everything before sound. And then I taught other phases of film history, but that was really my love was like early films. And I mean, if I had to really wind back the clock, my father was a little bit of a film head, and he had a Super 8 projector, and he used to, hang the sheet in the basement or outside on the wall of the house and project old 8mm and Super 8 movies. So Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, Little Rascals, some really weird titles as well. And so I would say that was in a way very subconsciously formative, but it didn't necessarily make me into a kind of a film buff. I think it's more like something that sort of got embedded in my psyche and that probably came back to me at a later time when I was working on my PhD. It's kind of funny because I didn't intend to go into film at all. I was looking at like Gothic American and British literature as the source of my PhD. And, if you want to know a really great source of stories, I would say those old stories, Nathaniel Hawthorne and some of the early British novelists, very Gothic. And of course, Gothicism really came out of the British novel. So those were some weird early influences. I have a half kind of comic book childhood, and I have this half kind of, more erudite, kind of pedantic degree, because I do have a PhD. I taught for a while, and I really enjoyed it, but it never felt like a full-on mission. There are worse jobs than teaching film history out there. So it was enjoyable, but it never felt like, wow, I'm really reaching people. So when my daughter was born in 2000, it was the height of the DV revolution. So I picked up a film camera and decided I was going to make a documentary because I needed something I could pick up and put down while I was raising her. And so I made a really technically poor documentary that will never really see the light of day to teach myself. But it was full on. It was like a feature-length documentary. And, to this day, it's on mini DV tapes in a closet somewhere. But I learned a lot from it and kind of got production fever. And I started a group of people that I knew that also wanted to self-teach themselves more about filmmaking. And that group met for a couple of years, and we did make a lot of kind of short projects and one long form project. And after that was done, I felt like I knew enough this was the height of course, web video. And there were all these kind of cross-platform problems that were going on. Now those problems don't exist anymore. But when I and my original business partner first went into business together, it was to make web videos specifically. And that didn't last too long because within a year, we got tapped to produce the Boulder Peak Triathlon, which was a made-for-TV broadcast of the Boulder Peak Triathlon, which we did for a couple of years, and we did a national broadcast of it. And that's one of those, I think every once in a while a project comes along that kind of like torture tests you to the maximum of the capabilities that you have in the moment. And that was one of them. Like, it really taught us a lot, and it put us in touch with some good mentors who helped guide us through a process that we weren't prepared for in terms of our background. But, that's why film is so great, such a great medium. You're always learning something new, always. No matter how much you know, it's never enough. And I like that about film. I like that challenge. I think that's probably a really long-winded answer to your question, but, my journey to film starts somewhere between my kind of comic book, silent film past childhood. And I used to read a lot of comic books. We had a house by a lake, where it was kind of like fireplace and comic books. And I used to read these really gothic comic books too, like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, all these Silver Age comics, weird Western tales, the early Jonah Hex, which was a really cool comic book and a really crummy movie.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
But, so I always had an interest in things that were like mystery and magic and the uncanny. And, film is really it's a magic trick. It's based on a magic trick. It's based on the fact that your eye sees everything kind of retroactively, right? The persistence of vision is what we call it. But it's the fact that your retina, is imprinted with these images a split second slower than they're actually projected on your eye. So that's a magic trick, right? Because you're always seeing everything retroactively. You don't see things when they're really happening in real time. You see them in that split second after they've already happened. Add a shutter to that, and that creates a moving image. So, everything about film is a little bit always on the kind of unreal, uncanny. It's an invisible realm that can sometimes be more alive than real life, or as alive as real life. And so, I was always interested in magical things as a child, and, fantasy novels, Chronicles of Narnia, that sort of thing, Wrinkle in Time, anything that had to do with like messing around with time and space, which again, film is a medium that inherently messes around with time and space. 5 minutes can be an hour and a half, or it can be 25 years or span generations. And, I think it's always been those kind of magical properties that I've really found compelling about film itself, the medium.
Yeah. And I love that when we ask this question, because we get so many varied answers, right? You have some people that maybe earlier in their life, they knew they wanted to make movies. And then you have some folks that kind of happened across, a career in the film industry through other paths. But usually there's this commonality of a desire to tell stories or an appreciation of, imagination, aesthetics, things like that. So it makes a lot of sense that, all these different elements and interests of your life kind of intersect and ultimately played out in film.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because my story is kind of an absurd one where I was in a graduate program studying literature, and I took a TV class just as a diversity credit for my curriculum. And the professor, of course, everybody who studies literature ends up in the teaching composition, right? Like freshman composition. And of course, I was not going to be any different from that, except that the film instructor who's teaching this television course said, "Hey, would you like to be a film TA next semester?" And I was like, absolutely. I would love to teach film history. So, it was just one of those things, I think, that was, there's those moments that you can look back on and they feel a little bit faded. And that was one of the things that kind of shot me out of a cannon in a totally different direction than the one that I started with, and all for the better. Even when I was teaching film, I was able to do a lot of combined courses. Like I taught Cold War literature and film. One of my favorite classes that I ever taught was one on forgotten films, because the University of Colorado, Denver actually owns a very impressive archive of old silent films that they inherited from a private collector who used to show them down at the DCPA way back in the old days. And when he passed away, he left the collection to the school. And so I was teaching out of that, and I taught this class called Forgotten Films, which was really fun because I wouldn't even preview the films. I'd go into the archive, pull a few things off the shelf, and then watch them with the kids in real time. And we would discuss like what's going on in this movie. Why was this movie forgotten? What's great about it? What's not so great about it? Should this be a canonized film or, a commonly watched film? Or is it something that should be relegated to, the dustbin of history? It was a really fun class because I was able to teach it as if the kids were actual archivists seeing things for the first time. And there were some real gems in that collection, some really fun films to watch, some really crazy films to watch. Like I said, teaching film was fun, but making films has a lot more moving parts, has a lot of challenges to it that I've always embraced. And so that's, I think, why I find it compelling. I'm always learning something.
Yeah. So your PhD program was in Oregon. How did you end up in Colorado?
I originally did a master's in Colorado, actually, and then I decided I want to get a terminal degree. I knew they did not hire their own PhDs ever here. So if I wanted to actually come back to Colorado and work, I would have to go someplace else and then try to get hired back into the CU system. And that's what happened. So I went away and kind of came back, and I got a job. No, my cat's trying to invade this podcast.
Cats are a welcome invasion. It's so cute.
You hear him meowing in the background.
Yep, it's lovely.
Tippy. He's named after Tippi Hedren. My daughter named him after the actress.
Aw.
Boy. Don't ask.
She too hates birds.
That's true. That's true. Good point. Anyway, so I actually went to Oregon so that I could come back to Colorado, having grown up here as a young adult and going away and then kind of coming back, got hired. And then, like I said, took a leave of absence in 2000 and picked up a video camera to kind of fill in the lack of creativity. Raising a child is not the most creatively stimulating activity, but, having a film that I was kind of obsessing about helped give me an outlet, while I was doing all the baby things.
It sounds like you had an early in with the triathlon recording, but as Becky stated at the beginning, you really carved out a niche in Colorado. How has that been? Is it just because it's a relatively small film community, or are you just that awesome at your job?
Well, this, especially then, the market's actually gotten easier. As hard as it is to carve out a living now, it was really tough then because this population explosion that we've had recently has brought a lot of work to our state as well. But it's also brought a lot of people. So we're very saturated in personnel. But there is more work than there was, back in 2000. This wasn't exactly a film mecca back then. It was quite the opposite of that. The film market had really dried up since the 1990s when we had several television shows that were shooting here. So, the feature filmmakers, when I got involved in making features, which was about 2007, 2008, maybe six or 7 years after I started working as a professional making movies. But it was really dry then because Donald Zuckerman came in and jump-started our film program, which was really quite dead in 2010. And the reason I know this was because I was shooting a movie at that time. And he came for a site visit because I was the only narrative film shooting in town. And I had qualified for the film incentives, which before he arrived was 10%, just a flat 10%. And, he got that bump to 20%. And there's some other perks to our film program that are kind of baked into it as well, in addition to that 20% that can make it attractive. But when I submitted for that, at that time you had to submit for an audit through the film office once you gathered all your paperwork after you wrapped your film. And he told me that mine was, at that time, 2010, was the first feature film in 4 years that was locally produced to qualify for the film incentives. So that's how much of a desert it was. And I think people lose perspective on the film incentives sometimes because they don't realize that, the past decade, a lot of films, locally produced films, have been made under those film incentives, one of which, like Cop Car, went on to Sundance, and, some of these other local film story successes have been funded through those tax incentive programs. So, and I think, things look good for the film incentives right now. They're fatter than they've ever been. There's more money available than has ever been available before. So I'm optimistic for the future of Colorado film because I've wandered out of the desert of Colorado film and things are looking pretty good to me now in terms of the availability of funds and the number of people, the number of crew that we have here to make them, the amount of young, talented personnel that we have that are still interested in making narratives is fantastic. It's great.
That's good to hear. Personally, having recently relocated from Washington State to Colorado, and as a filmmaker myself, I'm loving that the desert is getting some rain finally. I do think incentive programs, not just in Colorado, but in a lot of states, is something that kind of mystifies a lot of filmmakers, and it can be tough to push your project through. And I think you're one of the few producers in the state who's been able to do it multiple times. Is there any advice, not necessarily specific to Colorado, that you would give filmmakers in any state about, how to be persistent and find success working with the local government?
Our process is surprisingly, I would say, not difficult. I wouldn't call it easy because when there was some difficulty with the film office, they wound up putting, difficulty with the state communicating what they did and how the money was spent. They had to put in a lot of new controls, fresh controls, things that didn't exist in 2010 when I did that audit, and there's a lot of paperwork involved in that, but none of it is out of the range of the talents of anybody that's a producer. If you can produce a movie and get it across the finish line from development to distribution, this is just another another step that you have to take if you want to be able to recoup the 20%. And like I said, it's a bit of work, but a lot of it is kind of sheer grunt work in terms of collating, collecting, and being really organized about how you run your paperwork, your invoices and receipts and that sort of thing. And if you keep a tight production book, it shouldn't be hard for you to get through the film incentives. And I say that maybe, I've done it, I think 6 times now. So it's maybe easy for me to say. I definitely got tripped up on a few things along the way. So, there's a few people like me out there. Hire me or someone else to do it. We've done it. We know how to do it. If you want to feel like you can confidently, work your way through the project, or better still, in my opinion, haze yourself. I mean, the only way I made any headway in this business is by hazing myself, by doing things that were outside of the realm of my knowledge so that I could stretch myself enough to put them in the realm of my knowledge. So now I have a pretty wide knowledge base, I think, after 20 years of doing this. It's like that Malcolm Gladwell book. You do something for 10 years and you achieve a degree of mastery. I think that's absolutely true. It's really about like persistence more than anything else.
Right. But it always starts with taking that first uncomfortable step of diving into something you're not familiar with.
Absolutely.
Having to live in that space of discomfort for a while.
Yes. And you have to be willing to be afraid not to fail at things, which I've never, I find in the world, a lot of people do have issues with failure, but I'm kind of like, just means you're not trying hard enough. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. That's been my kind of motto from a fairly young age. It's like, there's nothing wrong with failing, but there's a lot wrong with not trying your hardest at something. Because you just don't have any fun and don't get any results. You don't get any personal growth out of it either. You just kind of do the same thing, lather, rinse, and repeat. And a lot of people like to do that, but I'm just not cut that way. That's not my way of operating. I like to learn stuff and I like to expand and, the harder challenges. And I would say definitely making narratives is not for the faint of heart, generally.
So speaking of incentives and taking on new challenges, so a pilot for a fantasy Western show titled Raven and Blackjack was approved for the Colorado Film Incentive. So this series is, I believe, inspired by your appreciation of comics and your own dissertation on patent officers in the 1800s. How the heck did all that come together into a story? Because they sound like very different things.
Kind of like everything, kind of the clownish and the mundane mixed with, something else, kind of my research historian past. This one came about, it is my pandemic project, essentially. So I'd been kicking around. I have half a screenplay written on my desktop that I realized I wrote myself kind of into a pickle. And in order to ever finish it, I have to go back and rework Acts 1 and 2 because Acts 3 is going to change all of Acts 1 and 2. And I haven't found the fortitude to do that just yet. So that, I would say, was my first kind of foray into a screenplay. But I wanted one I could complete, so I thought I'd just start another one. And I had this idea for 2 twins, a set of fraternal twins, a boy and a girl, one of whom, the girl who has real magical powers, and her stage magician twin, a boy who's 2 minutes younger than she is, who couldn't keep up with his sister's magical powers when he was young, so he taught himself stage magic. So it's basically a stage magician and this girl with real magic kind of scamming and adventuring their way across the Old West. And what's kind of fun about that is it really is grounded in some significant moments in history. Like, Harry Houdini was a guy who built his career going around debunking and trying to unmask spiritualist mediums. There was a lot of tension between the sort of real magic world and the technology magic world. And, technology has ultimately sort of triumphed over superstition and belief. At least during the Industrial Revolution years, I think we're coming back to a world where real magic may even find a place, if there is such a thing. I believe there is, but it's not always it doesn't always look the way we think it's going to look, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Not to get too metaphysical about these things, but that's, the historical reality was that there was this kind of tension between spiritualism, a spiritualist revival in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Arthur Conan Doyle was a guy who was, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, was a guy who was fascinated by mediumship. So there was this kind of culture war, I guess, between magic or spiritualism and stage magic or technology. So I think that's why, this kind of tension between the girl and her brother was something that I wanted to explore. So yeah, it was, so I made it a Western because when I was a kid, I used to like to read like Kid Cult Outlaw and Weird Western Tales, which I've already mentioned. And there are a couple others, The Rawhide Kid, I liked that Western frontier sensibility. Little kid, and I used to, pull comic books off the rack at this general store near us. And so I wanted to make something fun because I had made a movie that was pretty cerebral, and some people loved it and some people just didn't get it. So I was trying to make something kind of anti-cerebral, but bake in all the things that interest me. So for instance, there's the mother in this is based on a patent officer. The mom in this is black and the father is white, and they aren't involved with each other anymore. But in the 19th century, of course, women could not hold patents because that was property. They could not hold any intellectual property. So even though women were involved in the invention of a lot of different things, their names were not the names that could be put on the patent. And therefore, through history, those names have been lost. And the contribution of women to the history of science and technology has been largely erased. And I found that pretty interesting. And I was looking at these old copies of the Scientific American magazine, and they had this kind of rogues gallery of the patent officers. Patent officers in those days were kind of like rock stars because they were the gatekeeper to other people's fortunes, right? You invent something, you have to get it through the patent officer. So these guys made a really good living doing what they did. And there were people that had to be pleased and, whose palms had to be crossed, and, all that to get your own patent out so that you could, make bank on it. And they had this kind of rogues gallery of all the patent officers that were working for the Scientific American offices, which was also the patent office, Orson and Munn. And they were all white. And there was this like one black guy. And I was kind of like, I think this was probably about 1880 edition of the Scientific American. I was kind of like looking at this lithograph and thinking like, what is that guy's story? Like, how did he quickly in the kind of post-Reconstruction era get to be, one of the rock stars of science and technology? What made him, what made his story? So I've always been kind of interested in that. And so one of that stayed with me. It didn't really go too deeply into my dissertation research, but peripherally, it certainly inspired Raven and Blackjack. It was a piece of research that I just kind of like stuck with me. And so when I went and designed the mother, built the character of the mother, I kind of designed her like a woman inventor, because Jack is her son. So he sort of inherits her kind of ways of tinkering. And Raven is actually a little bit more like her father, a little bit more like removed and a little colder. And Jack is kind of warmer and goofier. And, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, but differentiated. And the mom is a tinkerer. So this is a post-Reconstruction story. So she's able to run a business, so she owns the local laundry and she has a shop with a yard in the back where she does all this inventing. And since she can't own the patents, she sells them to the kid's father and he uses them to make bank, which was a really kind of common practice if you can't patent something, you can still sell the idea to somebody and have them write the patent, and then they become the owner of the intellectual property. So I kind of set that up as sort of the backstory for the parents, like why they're kind of still involved with each other because they have this business arrangement. One of the interesting things I discovered actually after the fact, I had set this story in the 1890s, and in my mind, specifically 1892 was kind of when I was, more zeroing in on that date because it's an era when it's before film is invented, but it was an era of kind of explosions in technology, the light bulb and building of modern cities and all the attendant technology that went along with that. Post-Reconstruction, post-war, so there was, kind of an economic boom that was happening. And what I found later was that in 1892, which is when I set this totally subconsciously, that was the first year that a Black woman was awarded a patent. And this woman was awarded a patent, strangely enough, she built basically the ironing board that we use today with kind of the tapered end, and it's a collapsible, portable thing. She built a collapsible ironing board that has many of those same characteristics that are in a modern ironing board, and she was awarded a patent for it. And she was the first Black woman to hold a patent in 1892, which was coincident with my story and my character, which I thought was kind of cool. A cool coincidence.
So it sounds like, your research came in handy in a few facets of it. And even if the film wasn't invented, you're such a historian on early, silent film origins of film to silent film. Like it helped kind of inform how the world was. So
yeah,
between that and, the literature studies as well, I think all helped inform this. But we love a good genre mash. I think early on, you're giving us shades of everything from The Prestige to Carnival to Nightmare Alley with like the Western mix in of just the idea of like the Dust Bowl and folks out there maybe being more susceptible to mediums and things like that. Those are always interesting stories to me, like in movies when Coen Brothers and others explore stuff like that.
Yeah,
but,
at the end of the
we're
day,
sold.
It's a genre thing. It's a Western, it's a buddy film. It's a Western. It's got, magic and two kinds of magic in it and a little bit of time travel. And so it's supposed to be fun. Even though the things I'm talking about may not be that fun to your audience, they're really fun to me. I love discovery. I used to, in a lot of ways, even though I made a lot of narratives, the thing I've loved the most, I would say all of my peak moments in filmmaking have been documentary work, actually. Some of the coolest, weirdest stuff that I've shot has been for documentaries. And those are what I would say are some of my peak moments. I think that the narrative film is just a form of self-torture that I put myself through because I learn a lot.
Well, part of why we had you on, and Becky alluded to this as well, you're playing right into it, is we do want to ask you about that. Some of the documentary stuff you do, I understand, you used one of your armed cars from Blackwing. We'll get into the rental house talk with you. Your specialty equipment rental business on Raven and Blackjack. So as you're conceiving this project, does the fact that you have this resource available impact your writing process? Does it enable you to think bigger and grander?
Yes, I would say absolutely yes to that. Of course, I knew, that when I made a Western, I'd be able to use our vehicles to chase horses, which is a luxury that not all filmmakers have. And I think the horse chase scene looks pretty cool. But yeah, it was definitely, it was actually not the first time we had chased horses. My friend Buddy Thomas had DP'd a TV pilot. I think the title of it was Offline, and they shot it up in Netherlands, and it was snowing like crazy. And we had our Porsche. We have a Porsche that is murdered out or blacked out, has a black wrap on it, so it's non-reflective, and it has a 12 and a half foot boom arm on it. And we use a Movi XL gimbal on the end of that boom. And the interior of the car, we've got full monitors for all the seats. So the car operates. We've got a precision driver who is the driver. Then we've got a boom operator and a gimbal operator, head operator. That's the third seat. So we always fly with those three minimum. And then depending on whether production is supplying an AC, we'll either supply the AC or sometimes production will have one that they want to bring in the car to be the focus puller. And then we have another seat for a creative. And we have like a nice big 19-inch monitor in there, a big 19-inch Sumo that also records 4K. So if we want to, we can push the button and record straight to the monitor as well. But yeah, it's fully tricked out. All the monitors run off of the car power, and it's got a custom roof rack to support the arm. And our next little side project for it is we're going to put a racing seat in the rear so that we have a total of 6 seats instead of the 5 that we have now. So we're always doing stuff to kind of tweak and modify our rigs. There are certain industry standards out there, and our goal is always to try to reach for those while we work in Colorado, not compromise. So we bought this Razor, which is a 4x4, 4-seat UTV off-road vehicle. And we also have snow tracks for that. So we built that out this winter. We've owned them, but we haven't had time to kind of like really sit down and build out the rig because it required a custom roof, and it required to support the crane, and it required full enclosures. And we, along with our friend Tim Hardy, who's a race car driver, who's also a very, high level AC and DIT in Colorado, he installed a heater along with John, my business partner, so that it's nice and toasty in there. And actually Kevin Burr was who went out with us on our test runs, and I think he had a very interesting experience with us out there.
Yeah, Kevin is my friend for the listeners, he's a local television producer here in Colorado, but he's also shooting our short film this weekend. But he was talking about how fun and how much respect he has for you and anyone that is anywhere involved in this process, because it sounds very complicated, very rough, tough conditions.
It was. We took it up to Wyoming because John has a place near his house up there, and they do snowmobile rentals right at the trailhead, and they have a system of 220 miles of trails up behind this place, this lodge. And so we took it up there, and everybody drove up. It was about two plus hours to get there, and did a test day. So he was able to see really kind of behind the scenes of how we have to get out and tweak it and, kind of make adjustments and learn how this thing is going to operate under specific conditions and how tight are we going to run it? How loose are we going to let it go? All these things are questions that we want to have answered before we ever bring it out on a big gig. So yeah, we're always tweaking and testing and trying to perfect everything. It's what we like to do.
Yeah, I'm curious what inspired you to kind of create Blackwing. Was there a need that wasn't being met, or is it just like you love tech and gear and or a combination of the two things?
It was a combination of both. We were on a Chevy gig that I was a production manager on, and we didn't have anything like that in Colorado. And the guy who hired me does a lot of this type of work at a pretty high level. And when he brought a piece of this commercial. The commercial was very elaborate. It was a trade show video for Chevy, and it wasn't like a 30-second spot. It was like an elaborate trade show video, and he lobbied to be able to bring a piece of it to Colorado and managed to do that, which was great. And so we were shooting up on Loveland Pass, and we didn't have an arm car, but we had some of the grips build a fish arm into the back of a pickup truck, which was a very kind of classic way of shooting as a substitute for an arm car in Colorado. And when I looked at how much it cost, I was like, wow, we paid a lot of money for that. And it's, riskier because you got two guys operating this thing in an open bed, of a pickup truck. So that's not really safe when you're kind of whipping around, snowy roads because we were shooting in the snow. But anyway, so when John and I went to NAB, this same producer gave me a name of this company, Motocrane, and said, hey, go look at this thing. They're coming out with an arm, for an arm car. So I went and I looked at it, and I went and found John later that day, who was also at NAB, and I was like, oh, you should go see this thing. It's really cool. And he looked at it and he was like, do you want to go halves on one of these? And I had no intention of buying one at that point. I just thought it was like really cool and he should come see it. But, he was an early adopter of all the kind of stabilized gimbal technology that we now take for granted. He was an early adopter of Movi Pros, and he's a real guru of tech, period. Everybody who knows him as kind of the tech guy. He's like kind of a tech god. And he and I had worked on several projects together. We were both early adopters of Red cameras back when nobody knew what to do with them. And we had them. And so we were helping kind of troubleshoot and problem solve those cameras. Anyway, so we were both gearheads. And when he said, do you want to go halvesies on this? I was kind of like, are you out of your mind? But we ended up with a third business partner who subsequently left the company, I think, because of the lack of work here. But he was a really good connection for us because he got us into the reality TV world very quickly. And so a lot of our TV credits are due to his participation in our business. And they were great experiences for us because the reality shows really cut us loose to grab whatever we wanted. They kind of gave us some loose instructions and said, go do it. And so that gave us a lot of time to, while we were working, kind of tweak and perfect the things that we were doing and learn some of their behaviors on the job and things like that. So we gave them kind of an early adopter rate so that we could use that time. We got them some amazing footage. A lot of stuff on our reel is actually from some of those shoots, but unused footage that wasn't in the shows and, things like that. But it was a really great first experience and early experience. And it gave us a lot of time on our rigs that didn't have a lot of pressure, because it's different when you're on like a national car commercial and you get people in the car and they're used to operating a certain way. And there is definitely kind of more, generally speaking, kind of a higher degree of stress and tension to those jobs. But these jobs were actually kind of dreamy because they were kind of like, we'd like this, this, and this, go get it. And so that's what we did. And so it was a really great start to Blackwing to be able to do all these, Discovery Channel jobs right out of the gate. And eventually it led them to hiring us to shoot. They had the old Mustang from the film Bullet that belonged to Steve McQueen. And he used it in this iconic car chase through the streets of San Francisco where they're, now it seems kind of pretty tame stuff compared to what they're doing with like Fast and Furious and, shows like that. But in its time, it was the cutting edge of car chase sequences. And they found the car and they did a recreation alongside his nephew, I think, Chad McQueen. And they recreated the car chase sequence through the streets of San Francisco. And we were brought in to be the arm car for that. And by then we had quite a bit of experience. So it was a really great shoot for us because because, we got a little bit of notoriety from that, from shooting the recreation of the Steve McQueen bullet chase sequence through San Francisco. And we had police escorts through San Francisco and all this other fun stuff. So that was another kind of quantum leap kind of job for us. So chasing horses through the open field was actually a pretty relatively easy job for us, in the sense that we didn't have professional riders on our horses. We bought lessons for the two leads and the villain, Redmond Ramos, who plays the guy that they're chasing. We had them all running their horses in a straight line down an open field that had been cleared of rocks and stones and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't a difficult ride. So we were just basically doing kind of side-by-sides with them, with the razor, with the full arm. But the nice thing about using the arm is we were able to get in really close. So we've got like really good kind of galloping sequences and, things like that. Really good close-ups on them and stuff. I'm happy with the way that chase sequences turned out. Yeah, it was fun to be able to bring our toys on. We did that also as well on this other film I produced, The Healing Garden. For the opening credit sequence of that film is a guy driving through Denver. The story is about a guy whose wife grows very ill, and he sort of spends his whole fortune taking care of her. And so when she passes away, he has to sell his house and move to kind of a reduced circumstances. And so we had him driving through Commerce City and chased his pickup truck that he was driving all through Commerce City, and got some really cool shots of cranes and unique kind of urban locations. So yeah, whenever I have a job, I always like to be able to make my worlds collide, bring Blackwing onto narratives and make narratives that will involve Blackwing when I can. Doesn't always work out that way, but it's fun when it does.
It sounds like, you can go from simple to the most complex thing in the world, like recreating the most iconic film chase of all time. So is there anything you can say no to, considering your air, sea, and land? Are you going to make it work if somebody has the most insane demand? It sounds like it, based on your setup, your problem solving ability, and your equipment.
Well, John is a very good rigger. He can build custom rigs. There are some great riggers in this town, like Mitch Stelling and Artie Shelton, but John is a very good rigger, and he can solve any kind of technical problem. And we have other friends that are also good riggers. So there are things that we can piece together pretty much anything. We actually have a friend of ours one of the women who came out just to learn a little bit about Blackwing to our shop. She seems very mechanically inclined, so I'd like to do more work with her. And she also runs a pedicab business. So she's got a gig for the month of April. When she gets back here, we're going to rig her pedicab with a black arm as just because we can and, kind of show her how to do it and the materials that are needed to do it. And then it'll be a nice low budget option for Colorado. If you can't afford an arm car, surely you can afford a pedicab. She said she's carried up to 10 people in that thing. So so it'll carry a lot of weight. It'll carry a lot of gear. But, we're always up for a fun project like that. So it could be a nice collaboration for us. So that's on our list of fun things to do when we have a little free time. So we can rig anything. Air, sea, and land kind of came about because our former business partner owned a boat, and we were like, we're going to rig that, but when he moved on, we kind of lost the boat. So our sea part is on hold at the moment, but we have a line on another boat. So hopefully we can reignite that. But it was enough to get us up on the snow this year. That was really exciting, a really exciting enhancement to our business offerings. So, and it's working great. It's working amazingly well. We learned things about it that, it was sort of a better than expected experience with Kevin in terms of the operation of the equipment. It was just, the footage was amazing, and it was smooth, and it was beautiful. And we were in some really deep snow. Kevin can attest to that.
Oh yeah, he was telling me about it.
Very deep.
So I guess if anybody's listening that has some crazy demands or needs, you heard it here. Go to blackwingasl.com.
Yeah,
especially if you're shooting along the Rockies.
We shoot anything that moves. The horses were a lot of fun. We shot for that other pilot. We shot up in the snow using our Porsche on dirt roads, chasing horses. We chased airplanes, tandem bikers. We're not limited to car commercials, but car commercials are kind of our bread and butter.
Oh, you heard it here. Anything that moves.
Exactly.
Meryem will chase it with some kind of crazy rig.
Yep. We'll cook up something. Pedicab, car,
nice.
boat, If it moves, we'll go after it. But yeah, so that's some of the fun that we've had with Blackwing. I would say that one of the reasons it's turned out to be so fun, even though it was sort of an unexpected turn in the road for me, is I love working with John. He's such a genius at everything that it's really fun to work with him. But it's definitely taken us on a bunch of different adventures. And what's really fun about it is it's a very collaborative way to shoot. Like, everybody is in charge of a different piece of the frame. And some of our most interesting shots have come out of that collaboration, where somebody's saying, oh, if you move to the left a little, oh, if you slow down a little, oh, if you do this, everybody's got a little piece of the frame that they're kind of in charge of. And I think it creates some really fun shots that you couldn't otherwise get with any other vehicle or camera setup. And it's just fun that everybody's a contributor. Everybody in the car, you're always kind of constantly talking to each other. We have comm sets so that we can talk to each other. Even if somebody has to get out of the car, we can be like, hey, can you adjust the focus? Or, hey, can you format the media? Or whatever it is that we need to do. We can do that. But yeah, it's just fun.
I think that's a poignant way to kind of wrap up the formal interview section of this. Don't worry, you're not out of here yet. We still have some fun rapid fire questions for you next. But yeah, I think, the collaboration behind filmmaking is the reason why so many people are drawn to this process. So, and, I learn everything every time we have another guest on, and I learned a lot in talking to you today, Meryem. So appreciate that. Now, are you ready for the rapid fire 15? This is
sure
meant to be. Don't get intimidated by it. Some people get nervous, but basically, we're just gonna ask you some fun, kind of like inside the actor studio style questions. Just think of the first thing that comes to your head. Not a cool test, as Sean always says.
No, first thing that comes to mind, nobody's grading you on it. It's more of just like so the listener can get to know some of your tastes. And you've expressed some of your genre flair and stuff you like. So these should be easy answers for you, I'm thinking, because you might have them on the tip of your tongues, just some of your favorite things. So I could start us off if you're good to go.
All right,
All right.
Have it.
One of the ones we always like to start off with is, what movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Oh, gosh. Probably my most viewed film would be Harold and Maude. I like things that are a little bit off the wall. You might have guessed by now, but that is definitely one of the movies that really intrigued me in terms of what kind of stories can be told. It was so different from everything else out there, and it was so original, and the characters, were drawn so strongly. So really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there's still nothing really quite like it. What is your all-time favorite documentary?
All-time favorite documentary would have to be, okay, this is kind of another dark horse because that's what I'm all about. Genghis Blues. You got to watch it. I hope it still holds up, but it was a documentary about this guy who did Tuvan throat singing. He taught himself Tuvan throat singing by listening to the ham radio, and he was a blind blues singer. So he was a singer already, but he was a blind man, and he took up ham radio, and he heard this little kingdom of Tuva, these throat singers, which Tuva is a little bit sort of Mongolian, kind of Bhutan-ish, but not Bhutan, it's its own place. And so they decided to take him to Tuva. He got really good at it. It's a certain kind of guttural. It's a singing that sounds a little bit like a didgeridoo, but it's made with a human voice. And he got really good at it. And so the filmmakers took him to Tuva to compete in the national competition. And it's it's just such a madcap road movie. And I do like a good madcap road movie.
Those are fun types of docs for sure. I don't think I was aware of that one. It's from '99. I just looked up. I don't think I knew that one at all, but I will add that one to the queue.
Well, more trivia. So the brothers that, forgetting them, Rocco Bellic, I think, was the documentarian, but he was early creative partners with Christopher Nolan. So they were all buddies before Christopher Nolan became Christopher Nolan, and they went off to make really crazy documentaries. So that's kind of an interesting piece of trivia about that.
Who would you say is your favorite cinematographer / DP? Or maybe if not, if you don't have one, maybe what's a great example in your mind of great cinematography?
Oh, gosh. I mean, Fincher, Deakins kind of come immediately to mind. Actually, I would, throw in there just for fun, like Rachel Morrison and, some of the young female DPs are really making some great stuff these days. Frozen River is another really great film that is another sleeper film that was film lensed by her. So, and that's another kind of out there, but it's really good. The guy that made the movie Amateur that was made here in Colorado, he was a producer of that film. I got to talking to him on the phone a little bit, but anyway, I'm just loose associating.
Easy to do. All right. Who is your favorite director of all time?
Favorite director of all time. I know I'm going to flub this one because this is one of those questions where after the fact, I'm going to be like, why didn't I say so-and-so? I'm probably going to go old school with Hitchcock. Hitchcock was one of the earlier film directors. I had a friend who had like his entire library of films, and I had watched some of those late night Hitchcock TV shows when I was a kid, like staying up late, but I hadn't really watched any of his movies. And when I saw some of his films, I was so entertained by them. And I was like so surprised that I could be so entertained by such old films at the time. This was before I started my graduate studies and stuff. But I just got kind of riveted. So I'm going to go with Hitchcock because it did sort of change my focus, if you will, a little bit to revisit those old films.
And you cannot go wrong with that as an answer.
Well, and he and I share a birthday too. So there's that.
And the love of a woman named Tippi Hedren.
Yes. And Tippi Hedren.
What would you say is your all-time favorite Western film?
They're so different, but I still like the good, the bad, and the ugly. I still think the cinematography for that is great. I think that the images from it really stay with me. I think kind of in contemporary terms, one that I really have enjoyed that I found sort of inspirational when I was working on Raven and Blackjack was The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Just the look of that film I thought was really cool because it was something that I somewhat tried to emulate because it was very throwbacky, but it was also very contemporary kind of at the same time. So I'll go with either or both of those, I would say. I mean, there's so many good Westerns out there. There really are. I can turn on a Western and know that, you know, I'll be entertained. Even if I won't necessarily love it, I'll be entertained.
For sure. So now transitioning away from film for a moment, what is your favorite fantasy novel or novel series?
I mean, I would say probably the Chronicles of Narnia. It was something I used to go home from college and read every year, like annually, like, it's a long Christmas break. I think I'll reread the Chronicles of Narnia. So I'd throw that down as one of my, important mind-forming books that I really enjoyed as a kid and as an adult. But anything by Neil Gaiman, too. Let's backpedal on that a little bit. Like, he's another kind of Stardust. That's a great movie, and it was a even better book. A lot of his short stories I really like, but he's another kind of influential writer, storyteller to me.
Yeah, again, can't go wrong with an answer like that. You'd mentioned comic books being definitely part of your upbringing as well. Do you have an all-time favorite comic or maybe a character, even storyline arc? I know you mentioned some of the anthology style ones, but is there a particular, maybe a run or a character you particularly like?
I kind of went through, there's the childhood Silver Age, series. And then I went through kind of another run later in life as a young adult where I was reading like Neil Gaiman's Sandman. And one of the great tragedies of my life was that I was a little bit broke and I was going to graduate school. So I had Sandman 1 through 50 and I sold them for like $50 to a dealer, which are now worth like a phenomenal, astronomical amount of money. So, I don't have a lot of regrets, but selling that original Sandman series definitely hit hard.
That hurt me just hearing you say it.
I imagine so.
All right, now for something totally different. Who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, gadzooks. Right, like more.
Not familiar with that. Are they a mime?
I'm not a real celebrity person because, if they'll sell my film, yay. But I don't really roll that way. I don't know that I have a really great answer for that, like Morris the cat. I don't know.
That's fair enough.
That was a great answer. We'll take
Maybe,
it.
the $6 Million Man. What was that guy's name? I don't know. Steve Austin. Not
Lee Majors was the actor.
Oh, yeah. Lee Majors and what was the Bionic Woman? Both of them. Lindsay Wagner and Lee Majors.
Yep. Fair enough. Do you happen to have a favorite concert you've attended or maybe a memorable concert experience?
Yes. Let's see. I would say the most recent one that kind of blew my mind, it's not that recent, it was pre-pandemic, but was the Strumbellas. And I went to see them because they were this guy named Noah Kahan was opening for them. And he's had a couple of, smaller hits. And one of my closest friends from high school was his mom. So that was why I went. But the group that was the headliners was the Strumbellas, and they're amazing. Again, a little off the beaten path, but yeah, look them up. Spirits.
Nice. How about another music related question? Do you have a go-to karaoke song? Even if you don't really do karaoke, but if you had to, what would you do?
A funny loaded. Well, so there used to be a bar in Denver that did a karaoke night like once a month, and me and my friend would go, and I always closed to that bar.
Nice.
Believe it or not, play that funky music, white boy. That was my song. Yes, I do have a karaoke I was notorious for. But don't ask me to do it. I won't.
Love it.
The wild cherry version. You weren't doing like the vanilla ice version.
I'm not drunk enough to. But yeah, we would go to this one bar that had on our street that had karaoke night and
close it down. It sounds like that's awesome.
It was always the last call. Yeah.
Well, one more music related one. I always like to ask, what would be your walk-up music? Say you were coming out to give a TED talk on your company or on filmmaking, on anything, like, or maybe you were coming out to box somebody at Fantastic Fest, or as a fighter, as a ball player, what have you. What's your walkout entrance music? Is it play that funky music, or do you have some kind of bopper that you hear yourself coming out to?
It probably doesn't go that far back, but maybe far back. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I have such eclectic, weird music tastes, and right now I'm going through a stint of kind of like somber melancholia, which wouldn't be really good walk-up music. But I'd say anything by Led Zeppelin would be good walk-up music. Let's go with When the Levee Breaks. That's weird, and that's not really walk-up music, but
that's got one of the better rock and roll intros of all time. I disagree. Yeah. I think that's a great walkout song.
I love it. That's probably my favorite Led Zeppelin song too.
Oh, really?
And harmonica hits. Come on now.
Oh, yeah.
Not your usual walk-up music, though. Something a little snappier. but anything by Led Zeppelin. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so, I was kind of a rocker when I was a kid, and, kind of still, I'd say.
It sets a tone. It's a choice. So yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're on to a couple food-related ones. So you can only choose one of these Denver favorites. And you have to pretend the others don't exist. So you only get to pick between one of these three.
Okay.
Green chili, bison steak, or the Denver omelet.
I mean, stop me at green chilies.
Yeah.
Obvious.
Not even a competition for you. You're like green chili all the way.
No, that's self-evident. I mean,
yeah. I always get the green chili in my illegal Pete's burrito.
Else other than green chili? I mean, does anybody actually say bison?
I don't know. I created this question for you today, so I don't know. I'm going to test it. I'll have to sample it. I'll go on the streets of Denver and see. I don't know. I love a good bison steak.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to give that a whirl. Stay open.
I didn't realize green chili was a Denver thing till this question. I know it's in the Southwest in general. A lot of places like to call it theirs, but I didn't know it was a Denver thing as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's always necessarily only unique to Denver, but it's like the one thing. If you Google like Denver cuisine, green chili is going to be everywhere, and like
that's funny.
Any breakfast restaurant you go to, if you get anything, they're like, "Do you want it with green chili?" Smothered all over it. Yeah.
Related food question. There's a lot of good places to choose from, of course, but what would you say, Meryem, is your favorite local spot to eat in and around Denver?
Well, I'm kind of a freak for breakfast, so I'll go to Snooze anytime. I'm very happy that they just put one in the airport. It makes me want to go to the airport earlier. Haven't been there yet, but when I do.
I know I see it at the airport, but it's always packed. Yeah.
But all Snoozes are packed. But,
exactly.
I just tend to prefer to go out for breakfast than almost any other meal, so.
I agree.
I do like the Golden Diner. If you want just, good junky diner food, Golden Diner and Golden is, will satisfy. It's not Snooze, it's diner food. But if you want that like diner experience, it's a diner. I do like the Golden Diner. So how's that for local?
There you go.
Choice. Good experience, go to Golden Diner. Bad experience, go to Golden Corral.
All right. So outside of Denver, what is a destination that's on your bucket list to travel to that you haven't been? Like whether it's a country, a city, a region of the world?
Bucket list to travel that I have not been would probably be someplace with some really good snorkeling, like Turks and Caicos, Belize. Galapagos. Pick one. Any of those three. I'll take it.
Yeah, I would take any of those three as well. They all sound pretty great.
Anything beachy. I'm good. I'm good with that. The things we don't have here is where I want to go.
Both making me jealous of these beachy ideas.
Oh, yeah.
Finally, number 15 in this rapid fire 15. What would be your dream project to direct? Like, is there a genre? Is there a period? Or is there a style of movie you'd really love to tackle? And I'll say beyond what you're up to right now, which is a big grand, fantasy Western hybrid. Is there something else on the horizon? Maybe that's like or for lack of a better term, also a bucket list item of like the thing you'd really like to tackle.
I've got this screenplay that's sitting on my desktop that I referenced earlier that I think would be, it's really fun, but I got tripped up by not starting with an ending. I think the smart thing to do, and I read this watched this or read this, I forget, in an interview with the Duffer Brothers from Stranger Things. And they said, we always write with the end. We know what we're writing towards. We don't necessarily know how we're going to get there, but we know what we're writing towards. And I started the screenplay not knowing that. And now that I sort of know that, like I said, I have to go back and revise the first two things. But it's a road movie. I think I'm partial to road movies and buddy movies generally as genres. And I've certainly got the equipment for shooting a good road movie. And I even see whole scenes in my head of this thing. But it's basically the story of this young couple that while changing a tire on the side of the road, the guy gets tractor beamed up into a spaceship, but it doesn't actually happen. I won't give all that away, but they end up abducting one of the aliens instead of the other way around. And then they go on the road with it. And it's funny. I still read it and I still think, oh, this is funny. So I would like to direct that, but I have to write it first. So
I would watch that movie.
Yeah.
I call it my feminist alien abduction movie just for
sold.
For grins, but I have to write it before I can direct it. So, but it's funny. It just makes me laugh still when I read it.
I have a script called Untitled Werewolf Road Movie, so I totally understand that.
That sounds good too. I'd watch that. I mean, I tend towards the cerebral, but I also really tend towards the really off the wall, zany kind of comedy. I enjoy that. So that would be fun to direct a real pure hardcore comedy, I think.
Yeah,
right. There was no points and no score, but you still passed. Thank you for all those answers in the rapid fire 15 and obviously for the interview proper as well.
Yeah. But what's next for Raven and Blackjack? When can we keep an eye out for it? If are there any other projects that you've been working on that we should keep in mind?
I have another one that I'm going to be directing, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to talk about it quite, but I am going to be directing a Christmas movie.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And it's got legs. So, hopefully we'll be shooting it around Christmas next year, but it's still kind of in development now. So I don't want to say too much about it because as a producer, it's better I never talk about my projects really upcoming because you don't want to say things and get people attached to them. I think it's better to appear like these things materialize out of thin air than to say too much and then not deliver them, which is, what happens a lot of times. People just get overly excited about their projects. Which is understandable, of course, say a lot and then they don't realize that, this thing might be in seeking distribution for the next year. And if I talk about it now, nobody's actually going to be interested when it comes out. You don't want to shoot all your bullets until they're all ready. And that's just, I think, experience speaking. It's better to get to talk about things when it's appropriate to get really excited about them. And this one's early enough. I mean, the script is written and the team is in place to make it. So hopefully we'll be shooting in December, but you never know. It might be next December. So much depends on the funding and where and how it falls. So we'll see. But that's what's next up is a Christmas movie that I'm working on.
That is exciting. And we will be sure on paperstreetpodcast.com in the show notes, we'll link to your website and some social stuff for you.
Cool.
And again, thank you so much for the time, for the answers, for the knowledge and information. We're kind of jealous of your very unique career. We appreciate you taking the time out of chasing herds of animals across a plain in a dune buggy to talk with us here.
Well, this has easily been its equal in terms of fun and games and excitement anytime.
Lies. Nothing's as fun as chasing horses.
We should put that on our description on, Apple or whatever. Just as fun as all that. Seriously, thank you. We appreciate you taking time out of your billion projects and things that you have going on. And best of luck with Raven and Blackjack, and fingers crossed that funding gets finalized and all set, squared away for that Christmas movie.
Yeah, and fingers crossed for that too.
Yeah, we're excited to see what comes next for you. And good luck again with the fantasy western. I'm more than sold on too.
Well, I hope so. And, just I do have some tweaking to the show Bible to do before I'm really ready to roll it out. You go through all those motions to get the project, and then you got 3 more seasons that you need to have like dialed to really present it. So I'm working on that part right now. So
I hear you. I have no doubt you'll figure it all out sooner than later. You got the problem-solving producer mentality, so we're rooting for you. And can't wait to see it.
All right. Well, thank you guys. That was fun.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.